Hey, I'm Stephanie, and welcome to this edition of The Devil Wears Prada, So Should I? Where I will review all three of the new Prada Dimensions Holo Nude eye palettes. I'll provide swatches, application footage, comparisons, and everything you need to decide which one, if any, might be right for you. And together we'll answer the question, at $80 a pop, are these palettes, worth selling a kidney for? Spoiler alert, you might want to keep both your kidneys, but I'll let you be the judge of that. Let's first take a brief jaunt into the Prada universe, where terms like holographic and nude somehow make sense together. As always, feel free to use the timestamps to jump to any section that might be more relevant for you. I won't judge. I personally skip Netflix intros all the time, unless of course it's Stranger Things. Then I need to take some time to really groove out to the theme song. Do you have any shows like that? When Prada Beauty first launched their cosmetics line in 2024, I feel like they attempted to mirror their Prada peculiar approach to fashion, subverting classic beauty elements with unexpected twists, like convincing the world that performance nylon could be the height of sophistication. In that spirit, the foiled formula in their initial quads had a very metallic industrial feel, almost old school compared to the market at the time. The performance nylon of the makeup world, perhaps? While sheer shadows and toppers were dominating the market, this opaque foiled metallic felt almost retro when it launched. Or should I say, it looked retro, because it actually feels quite updated. It's lighter weight, it's a thinner formula that tends to sit much more smoothly on the skin than some of those old school foiled metallic shades. So if it's the equivalent of nylon, at least it's luxury nylon. And if anybody can do it, it's Prada. Those first quads were a bit on the bold side. Yes, all of them included some neutral shades, but each of them also had a bold pop of color and also some pretty dramatically foiled shadows. Beautiful to look at, but not necessarily my daily wear. I guess they were kind of like the equivalent of those exotic vacation photos that I sometimes admire on my phone early in the morning before I've really woken up, sitting on the couch in my robe, hair still disheveled, haven't had coffee yet. Maybe I'm trying to drink salt water because some expert on the internet told me that it was healthy. In other words, the color combinations looked beautiful, just they weren't compatible with me at the time. And I think a lot of people felt that way about Prada's initial eyeshadow quads, intimidated by that pop of color. We are the generation, after all, who made colors like millennial gray and sad beige into personality traits. So to match the market, Prada Beauty has now launched some more neutral-friendly palettes in 3 different depths, which is great because it can appeal to a broader range of skin tones, something that more luxury brands need to consider doing. As a professional beige babe myself, the majority of my makeup collection is literally the color of dirt. These neutral options appealed to me much more, so I decided it was finally time to try Prada Beauty. I used my channel's budget to purchase all 3 of the new quads, plus one of the old ones for comparison's sake, because I'm nothing if not thorough. So my wallet is feeling a good deal lighter right now, but that is why I use affiliate links in my show notes. When people use those to shop, I earn a small commission, which I can then use to purchase products like these for independent reviews like this. Now let's get into the nitty-gritties of these beauties with some swatches. The lightest of the 3 new palettes is called No. 7 Peony, and it's so light that it will probably only really show up on the lightest and fairest skin tones, because it barely shows up on me. For anyone with a skin tone even slightly deeper than mine, this palette would probably just become a very chic paperweight. The palette contains 2 satin shades, one neutral light brown, and a warmer, lighter earthy pink. One pink shade with a light pink base and pale blue, almost white sparkles, and they say this shade is holographic, but I beg to differ, so we'll come back to that later. And it also has one soft matte, cream-colored shadow that seems to almost blend completely into my light neutral skin tone. The medium palette is No. 8 Pansy, and also leans pink, but the colors are richer and much more present on my light skin tone. This palette contains 2 satin shades, one light neutral pink, and one almost pale copper or faded terracotta color, the kind that can lean orange on some shades of very fair skin. It also has one mid-toned, soft matte rose shade and one holographic shade with a translucent, barely there, light brown or maybe lilac base with pale green sparkles. The contrast lends this shade its slightly holographic feel. This one actually does what it says on the tin. Remarkable. The darkest palette is No. 9 PRIMULA, and instead of leaning pink, this quad dips much more into the terracotta and peach range. As a light-skinned person, person, I am still able to use this color story pretty easily. But I've also seen creators with darker skin tones like Bree Moore and Heba S use this, so I'll link their reviews in the show notes if you'd like to see how this one looks on darker skin. It contains 2 satin shades, one deep mid-toned, slightly reddish brown, and one terracotta color. It has one burnt peach matte shade and one holographic color with a reddish purple translucent base with blue sparkles that lean towards teal in some lights. Once again, the contrast between the dark but translucent base and the brighter sparkles creates what Prada calls the holographic effect, and what I call, ooh, pretty. So all 3 palettes contain one soft matte shade, 2 satin shades, and one holographic shade, which is more or less holographic depending on the palette. So let's take a closer look at comparing the 3 holographic shades. Upon careful examination, I've discovered there is quite a difference between the lightest pink holographic shade in the Peony palette and the other 2 holographic shades from the deeper quads. The holographic shade from the Peony palette looks pretty darn dull in comparison. It's pretty, but it's definitely not exciting, especially not for $80 US. The holographic shades in the darker quads have a deeper translucent base with brighter sparkles in a contrasting color. So shades of red in the base and green or blue in the sparkle, they're on opposite sides of the color wheel, and thus they kind of make each other pop when they're next to each other. It's not just because of the color or sparkle though. The shadow also sits differently on the skin. I feel like the base of the 2 darker holographic shades is thinner, it's lighter weight, and gives a smoother finish. The lighter shade just doesn't apply quite as smoothly or thinly and looks just a little bit dry on the eye. Kind of like trying to spread cold butter on toast. Gives new meaning to the phrase applies like butter, right? It applies like butter. Is this what we want? But back to the topic at hand, I decided to look at the ingredients list to see if I could find a difference in formulation between the holographic shadows. And I have to admit, it's very hard to tell exactly which ingredient goes into which shadow since the shadows don't have names. But what I did was I compared every single ingredients list on all of the packages of all of the palettes that I bought. And I found 2 ingredients that were in every single eyeshadow in every single palette except one. One shadow in the Peony palette did not contain lauryl lysine or hydrogenated polyisobutene, and both of those function as conditioning and softening agents. So this is just pure speculation on my part, but I think that there's more to the difference in the holographic formulas than just the difference in contrast and the difference in colors. I think there's also a difference in formulation, and that's why the lightest holographic shade feels a little bit heavier and not quite as thin. Since we're talking about how these palettes look and feel on the eyelids anyway, why don't we roll some application footage? All 3 of the new Prada Dimensions Holo Nude eye palettes and the Profusion Quad that I purchased from the initial release have formulas that are worthy of being called luxury based on the quality, but they're not necessarily a typical luxury eyeshadow. Most luxury brands go easy on the pigmentation, leaving more of a whisper of color on the eyelids. Prada pigmentation, on the other hand, does not whisper. It announces itself. The pigmentation is really present, although it is kind of hard to tell that with the lightest Peony quad on my skin tone. But although they are quite pigmented, they are still very easy to blend, and nearly every shade has an extremely lightweight feel. The one exception being that holographic shade in the Peony quad, which is just a little heavier than any of the other Prada shades I tried. Every single quad wears extremely well, even on my oily, deep-set hooded eyes, which, for reference, I always prime with Urban Decay Priming Potion, because that is the only way that any eyeshadow ever seems to stay on my slippery lids. I wore these quads over 12 hours and only noticed minimal creasing with one shadow, and that was the lightest holographic shade from that Peony palette. The rest of the shadows remained intact without any creasing or fading. The finish of all of the shadows is beautiful. The matte finish is truly a soft matte that sits well and lightly on the skin. The satin finish has more of a sheen to it than other satin formulas I've tried, and if you look closely, each satin shade has some actual sparkling particles articularity to it. So they're not quite as soft as I was expecting, but they're still very pretty. And we already discussed the holographic shades. The lightest one is okay, but the holographic shades in the Pansy and PRIMULA palettes are the ones that really stand out. Not only with their dynamic finish, but also with how lightweight they are on the lids. Because this is a review, I'm going to get really nitpicky for a second when it comes to how these quads are organized. In every single quad, the color I want to use as a crease shade has the satin finish. Now, I most commonly use a matte shade as my crease color, but I don't mind using a satin for that purpose either. Here's the thing though, due to my prominent brow bone and hooded eyes, I typically place my crease shade above my crease to give the illusion that my brow bone isn't quite as prominent, and it creates the illusion that my eye is a little bit larger and less hooded. But I have a lot of vellum hairs, otherwise known as peach fuzz, in that area. Those hairs are almost invisible. I can only really see them if I look for them in a magnifying mirror. But because the satin shades in these quads are more reflective than your average satin, I feel like they emphasize my follicles, making my skin look more textured than it actually is. It's not a huge deal. I'm not even sure that anybody other than me would even notice it, but I enjoy nitty-gritty reviews, so I thought I would include it here. Although everything about these quads, from the sturdy, refillable packaging with a magnetic closure to the quality and wear time of the shadows themselves, feels premium, I don't think that any of these color stories or formulas are truly new or surprising. Generally, I would say that these palettes are not straight up nude eyeshadow palettes. These are Prada's take on nudes, because in comparison to their initial launch with the foiled metallics and pops of color, these new quads are quite subdued in color, and the holographic shades differ from the foil shades because they've got translucent bases and they're just generally more in line with the toppers and sheer shadows that are currently on trend. The lightest Peony palette is the most nude quad of the bunch, not just because it's the lightest and barely shows up on my skin, it also has the most neutral undertones of these three quads, but that doesn't mean it's truly neutral. Just like the other quads, it does lean warm, just not quite as much. Pansy and PRIMULA, the two darker palettes, are both more impactful quads, not just because the colors are darker, but also because the colors lean less towards colors that are native to most skin tones, and they lean more into making a statement. Pansy is pink. PRIMULA definitively leans terracotta, so although they are the three most nude palettes in Prada's range, they do make more of a statement than your traditional nude eyeshadow palette would, especially with those holographic shades. So what are they similar to? Well, although the finishes might be slightly different, I do feel like the formulation of the soft matte shadows in the Lancome quints have a very similar feel to these Prada mattes and satins. But considering how unimpressed I've been with the holographic shadow in that Prada Peony quad, I think I would actually recommend the Lancome French Nude over Prada Peony. It doesn't lean quite as pink, and it's more of a true nude palette. The shiny shade in the Lancome quint might not be holographic, but it has that same lightweight translucency of the holographic shades that I like so much from the deeper palettes. Its shine is more eye-catching than the somewhat dull sparkle of Peony's holographic shade, plus it doesn't look heavy or dry on the lid. And I like that the Lancome matte shadows don't emphasize any texture in my crease. But of course, if you're looking for a true pale pink palette, then you should go with Prada's Peony. The next darkest, Prada Pansy palette, reminds me a lot of Charlotte Tilbury's Pillow Talk palette, but with a holographic twist. I would love to compare the two directly for you, but I decluttered Pillow Talk because I had Lancome's Nude Sculptural palette, and I feel like they're the same thing, but the Lancome is the better version. I'll link the video comparing the two on the screen in the show notes in case you want to see that. But basically, if you're looking for a Pillow Talk sort of palette, I would say Lancome's Nude Sculptural is my personal favorite everyday pink palette. But Prada's Pansy palette is a close second. They're both of equally good quality. I just find that the textures in the Lancome palette are a little bit more practical for me. But of course, if you're looking for a pink quad with a special twist, the holographic shade in Prada's Pansy would make that one the better choice. The only other quad I had that was similar was YSL's 600 Spontini Lilies palette, which is much more pink. Although the quads in YSL's mini clutch line contain some of my favorite matte formulas of all time, this Spontaneous Lilies quad was the one that impressed me the least out of that entire lineup, mostly because of this dry satin sequin shade, which actually reminds me a lot of the holographic shade in the lighter Peony quad. And if I thought that the Spontaneous Lilies sparkle shade was unimpressive, look at how unimpressive and dull the Peony shade looks next to it. So that says something. If I had to choose between YSL's Spontaneous Lilies quad or the Prada Pansy quad, I would probably choose Pansy because it is less pink than Spontaneous Lilies, which, as a side note, has actually become a blush palette for me. When it comes to the deepest PRIMULA quad, the only somewhat similar small palette I had to compare it with was the Natasha Denona Mini Star palette. The brown and burnt peach shades are somewhat similar to the shades in PRIMULA, but the main reason I chose this palette for comparison is because the Mini Star palette also contains a holographic kind of shade. The key difference is that the Natasha Denona version has a shiny but smoother finish on the lid with a redder base and a more prominent green flip, while the Prada version has more individual sparkles that lean more blue, while the base leans more purple. My question for you is, do you think you want one of these? Did you already buy one? If so, which one, and what do you think of it? If I could go back in time, knowing what I know now, would I choose to repurchase any of these palettes? And I'm talking about as a normal makeup-obsessed person, not as someone who's purchasing things to review on YouTube. For a little bit of context, just in case you're new here, I'm currently in a phase of life where I'm trying to simplify a lot of things. I'm just generally trying to buy less. I call it adagio shopping or slow shopping. Basically, I would love to be the Marie Kondo of makeup. My only problem is that everything sparks joy. So I'm failing miserably at that. In that context, I probably would have just stuck with the comparison palettes that I showed you that I already owned, and I probably just would have used those. But if I had been having a moment of weakness and I just really wanted to get one of the quads because, you know, how we talk to ourselves, you convince yourself you need another neutral palette because it's slightly warmer and more holographic than the other 37 that you already own, then I probably would have purchased PRIMULA because it gives you this really warm, dark smokiness with some additional interest from that holographic shade. So I think if I could choose one, I would choose PRIMULA, but I only would have bought it in a moment of extreme weakness. My second favorite, and it is a pretty close second, is the Pansy palette because I really like that the holographic shade is a little bit lighter and brighter, and it would just make it a little bit easier to wear on my skin tone in more situations. Plus, I really like how the green from that holographic shade complements the pink of the palette. My last choice would be the lightest Peony palette, mainly because I'm just not so gung-ho about that lightest holographic shade. And I know I've been talking a little bit of trash about it. It's actually fine. It's very pretty, in fact. It's just not all that exciting to me. And I feel like at a price point of $80 US, I need to be excited about every shade in that palette. I do have to say, I really like the center shade in the Peony palette. It's a great one and done shade on my skin tone for a very light makeup day. In fact, it reminds me a little bit of one of my favorite one and done shadows of all time, Beige Mitza. It's just a lighter, more subtle version of that that's not quite as shiny. But I do have to say that if I were going back in time, with the knowledge I know now, I am very happy with Beige Mitza, so I don't feel like I would need the palette for that one shade. However, if you are extremely fair, Peony might be a great option for you. Overall, I think that all of the quads I tried are a solid, high-quality version of a neutral palette with a twist. So if you happen to see a color story that's really speaking to you, I do think that you'd probably be happy with the purchase. But just like all eyeshadows, these are just fancy dirt pressed into a pretty pan, which is important for someone like me to remember because I live with an inner makeup monster who always wants me to buy all the new makeup. If you want to see what that looks like, I have the perfect video for you right here. Please like, comment, let me know what you think of these palettes, but even if you don't do any of that, I hope you have a great week and we can all remember that even stumbling can be a form of moving forward. So let's stumble in style.